Have you ever played Fallout, only to think, this is really cool, but I wish I could be playing as a pack of heavy artillery strapped to a dog? Well, here it is, whoever asked for this. Contrary to first impressions, Metal Dogs is neither a rogue type nor a twin-stick shooter. It's just a little dungeon crawler where you go through randomly generated stages, kill entire hordes and get sick amounts of loot. In fact, the most apt comparison would be Earth Defense Force, so if you're into killing giant bugs and getting paid, you might want to try this out. Just be aware that this doesn't have any sort of multiplayer component, so no fun shenanigans here. The story has you playing the role of Pochi, a Shiba Inu armed with all types of ballistics, who gets blown right into the doorstep of some mad doctor that revives him. It would make more sense if he was armed after he was revived, in some sort of science experiment, but nope, he was already a metal dog to begin with. It's important to note that this belongs to a long-running series of RPGs called Metal Max, where people are trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world while running around in tanks and fighting robot dinosaurs. But I have to be honest, I barely know about the series besides the title and the failed reboot that had characters designed by none other, which I'm familiar with because of reasons. It's a shame, but I guess military otaku ain't the biggest audience nowadays, so for now, this series is dead and buried. If there are any sort of callbacks to the series in this, I am sorry to say that they all flew over my head. Not that the story is anything important. It all boils down to Pochi trying to go west for mysterious reasons, while helping the Mad Doctor finding a cure for machine head syndrome. Did I tell you that this game is Japanese? Because let me tell you how much Japanese this game is. Loyal Dog, embrace the machine gun. A lump of romance, Gold Hand. Burning Dog. Cannons from the mouth. If a dog walks, he will be poisoned. I could do this all day, but I think you get the point. This is probably what happens when you throw a script into either a machine or a really cheap translator, because damn, these are some of the straightest direct translations that I've ever seen in a while. Just pure PS2 budget game soul in here, and I love it. Huh, hell, that is pretty good. This town works as your main hub, which is just a menu, but still, at least the image evolves as you progress to the stages, which is a neat detail to include. Doesn't stop it from being weird as everyone else is already dead, and there really isn't a reason for the town's expansion, but whatever. First of all, here is a little tip. Max volume might be okay at the start, but believe me, it gets out of hand really fast, even before you're firing hundreds of rockets at the same time. Okay, moving on. There is a hardcore mode, but the game is not that good to consider this type of challenge. Imagine if every time you died in EDF, you would lose your current equipment. Yeah, no thank you. The first couple of stages are pretty aggressive on the tutorials, with the usual pop-up problem of presenting information when you least expect it, which leads to closing them by mistake and not knowing if it was important. So here's a quick rundown on what is up. You can equip 3 main weapons of any kind, no restrictions. The trick here is striking a balance between power and quick reloads, so you don't waste any time not dealing any damage. Still, if you want to turn into a fully automatic dog or a rocket dog, you can also do that. You also get equipment slots for both armor and a collar, though most of them don't really fit into that category. The 2 quick inventory slots are also super important, as in later levels you are constantly chugging potions while committing to more dangerous threats. This makes more sense when you face your first wanted, which is what the bosses are called in here, and most of them are just bigger enemies with big attacks, which are surrounded by smaller enemies. If you were lucky enough, you will only realize how atrocious the lock-on is around this point, which is a big problem because you want to be locked in at all times to be able to hit anything while dodging the attacks. And while it works when there are few targets around, when you want to open up a boss right from the start, it's mostly impossible. It's one of those cases where you really have to try it to see how bad it is. While I'm talking about technicalities, you can play with the keyboard, but the game being isometric doesn't help the fact that you're going to be walking diagonally most of the time, which isn't the most comfortable on keyboard, so I heartily recommend the controller for the handling of these metallic woofers. Yeah, this is basically the entire game. Later on, you unlock 2 other dogs named Belle and Bonanza, which is not that much of a big surprise. They're kinda in the center of everything, so it's impossible to avoid that surprise. You would think that starting at level 1 would leave them at a disadvantage against Pochi, but as your attack power is basically dependent on the current stage loot, you quickly gain all the levels that you need right away by just killing a few enemies. They describe the Doberman as fast but weak, and the Pug as slow but strong, but to me, they all seem like the same, so I guess it's only a matter of personal preference. The real problem here is how you have an inventory limit, so it's ill advised to have all of the 3 dogs equipped, because then you barely have any space for loot. Yes, the held inventory is shared between the 3, which is just beyond stupid. After you unlock the burst attack is when things start to get really crazy. The collar accessories all have a type of special attack that is on a meter and lets you deal big damage, which you might be inclined to save it for tougher encounters, but here's a tip. Don't. Just go all out as soon as you can, because the meter builds back up as you attack, so you get to a point that you deal so much damage that you're constantly using it in tandem with weapon cooldowns. Having this in mind, the late game is more about kiting the maximum number of enemies so that you can unleash a barrage of artillery to the entire group instead of picking them off one by one. The EDF energy is indeed really strong here, with how overpowered you can get if you put in the time to grind for the rarer weapons, but the problem here is that the level layouts do get boring really quick. Each stage starts by only being a couple of floors, but later on they get bigger and more complex, and you'll be looking at the map most of the times just to rush to the exit, as you don't actually have to fight any of the encounters besides some of the bosses. This falls into an interesting conundrum, where by the later half the stages are too long, while at the same time the game just cuts too short out of nowhere before they let you experiment with more ridiculous loadouts. The majority of the stages are used as a way to introduce a single mechanic at a time, like fridges that freeze enemies or canisters that temporarily raise your stats. When they're finally done with explaining all of it, there's only a couple of stages left. The game does continue on after the story ends, offering you extra stages to go through, but they continue to be so bland that... You can also get these rare dog tags that randomly drop as loot and that you can exchange for exclusive rewards in the shop, and that is pretty cool. But the problem here is that most of the stuff here is worse than what you find during the later stages, and all the cool stuff is locked behind a ridiculous amount of dog tags. Even worse is how you can get a plethora of funny looking accessories, which is great, I love it when games do that, but they occupy the equipment slot and they have awful stats, so you have even less of an incentive to use any of them. You can upgrade stuff in multiple ways, but that consumes rare resources, and all the times I tried it out, they all made the equipment worse than it was. Talk about unlucky, huh? I would like to say that this is a game that you can just tune out while listening to your own playlist, but if there's anything that this game does well, is the music. This really has no business of having such a good collection of tunes, so I guess that's where the budget went. I could definitely see myself getting lost on the hypnotic layouts of Metal Dogs while grinding away for better loot just to see how ridiculous it all gets, but I got too much on my hands nowadays to get that deep into it. If you like that this Gaia philosophy of numbers going up feels good, then more power to you, because to me there's a point where that stops working and it usually comes pretty fast. It was pretty cheap, so it was a pretty fun game for what I paid for, but for others, Metal Dogs might come down to a hard bargain. You know what? Just go play Tokyo Jungle. That is still a great game that you can emulate pretty reliably these days, so please do give that one a try. The little story twist is great, and the arcade gameplay is really fun. Anyway, until next time. And don't forget, if a dog walks, he will be poisoned.